1, 2, 1, 2. Yeah, thank you very much. Please, we need to start. We are very late. As you see, we should start at 4, and we are now 20 minutes later. So I will. I start now with the next presentation will be held from for Flora Mészáros. She works and lives in Budapest, Hungary. Flora Mészáros is an art historian focusing on avant-garde and contemporary art, completing a PhD at the University of Paris for Sorbonne. She's a senior lecturer at Károly Gáspár University in Budapest. No, Metropolitan University of Budapest, yeah. Teaching contemporary photography and contemporary Hungarian and international art. What? Yeah. And she. Avant-garde and contemporary art. Yeah, and she will speak now about bridging borders, abstract artistic dialogue between Paris and Central European peripheries. Thank you very much, Flora Mészáros.
Just I choose to speak like that, if it's okay. Yeah. And forward, backward, and that's on back. So this is.
That's the back. That's forward.
Okay. So, welcome everyone, and I will start a bit further and reflecting on the first section when we mentioned the research on Piotrowski and Matthew Rampley. I would like to, I hope I can somehow represent not the past art history in a way of how Paris attracted artists from Central Europe and then came back to their own country and represented some kind of peripheral art, but in a new way to show the interaction between East Central European art centers, art capitals, and the Parisian art in abstract art in non-figuration, especially in 1920s and in 1930s. So I'm focusing on those artists who were really well celebrated, working in a really well-celebrated groups such as Art Concrete, Circle at Carré, or Abstraction Création in the 1920s and 30s. On those kind of groups which in this period in Paris collected all the artists who believed in organic or geometric abstraction or other kind of non-figuration, like the Czech Kupka, who actually rejected to be connected to abstract art. And these artists mainly become non-figurative just in Paris. So we have to mention that before that they were connected to modernism in East and Central Europe, and they were not part of any communities in a way of Central European communities in the 1930s. The only exception could be the Polish art community, which is usually highlighted as they were organizers and they were representatives of non-figurative artists, as a way that being collected in coffee houses or being collected in in exhibitions. But as we see, the Hungarians, the Czech, the Romanian, or the Ukrainian artists, they were not collected together. They were connected to American or French artists. And I would like to also highlight that we cannot talk about any Parisian non-figuration or French art at the time, such as there is no French abstraction. It means that in the 1920s and 30s, these artists, including Japanese, Italian, or American artists, represented what is non-figuration. And for example, in Abstraction Creation, which we know nowadays that there were only 19 members in the whole group, only 9 of them were French, and the others were coming from 20 other nations. So we should also mention that it's important that this kind of real view on Paris shows us that Central European, Eastern European artists were also the part of how we can see what is Parisian non-figuration. And for them, there was an exhibition in Hungary, in Debrecen, which was titled Parisian Abstract, that I had the chance to organize 2 years ago. And I wanted to mention that there is some kind of East Central European abstraction that we can highlight at the time in Paris. But this was not a style, this was not a trend or a tendency. It was more a phenomenon that we could see that all those artists who came from Austro-Hungarian monarchy, original successor states of Austro-Hungarian monarchy, or were the students of masters of Art Nouveau, Jugendstil, and Secession. They had common examples in creating the whole image field, the whole structure of the picture, using that kind of precisity and decorativity, which is connected somehow to the applied arts. As we see, for example, in the composition by František Foltén, which is in the Belvedere collection, or the Mechanism from 1928 by Kupka, or the Romanian and half Hungarian artist Henrik Nagyboren, who changed his name to Henri Nouveau, who was also studying in this kind of style. And what is important, that in this way, as we say, that these artists didn't follow the non-figurative art, the abstract art of the 1930s in a way that the use of the whole construction of the image field, or this kind of decorativity in their artwork, are not coming from what they had seen in Paris in the 1930s, but from earlier, 10, 20 years earlier, from their original experience in Central and Eastern Europe. In this way, they had the influence, they could have the influencer effect on the Parisian art, as we see in the second École de Paris, like Serge Poliakov, who was also influenced by these artists. Usually the art historians, such as in Hungary, related to Martin, mentioned that he spent almost 10 years in Paris and was affected by the Parisian school, but actually that kind of use of the composition and the respect of decorativity didn't come from Paris, but it came from Joseph Riper-Ronai, the Hungarian artist, who was his actual master. So the Central European tradition was also important, because we see some examples like the Hungarian Lajos Tihanyi, who became a good friend of the American Alexander Calder. How Calder started, for example, his use of compositions after studio visits at Tihanyi's places. This was possible also because if we just focusing on the Parisian area, they were actually they were actually living on the south part of the Paris on Montparnasse, and we know by the 1930s they were actually segregated by the French and the government and the Paris municipality. So for us, the beauty of the French modernism in the 1930s didn't exist, because it was actually a political decision that they put together the artists in a same district to check them, especially Jewish artists, because it was already an anti-Semitic and xenophobic era of France. By the way, we have to also highlight that this kind of segregation helped these artists to create international communities at that time. There were so many of them from this around 20, 30 artists who became non-figurative and came from Eastern Central European region, who didn't only choose Paris, but after that they went back to their original region and settled down there. This is a different era in modernism in a way that these artists didn't spend 1 month or 2 weeks or several years in Paris like in the beginning of modernism. Most of them settled down for 10, 15 years, like the mentioned František Foltin actually spent 10 years, or for example the Hungarian Ferenc Martin, who I would like to highlight, he spent 13 years in Paris. And we see different kind of dialogues between the Eastern Central European art and Paris at that time. One of them was the dialogue which was represented by well-acknowledged non-figurative artists who actually received the rank as an artist early in Paris, like the Romanian-born Constantin Brancusi, who actually organized so many shows and a constant journal in Romania during his stay in Paris. In 1938, for example, he created 15 large sculptures in Zsilvásárhely in Tiruzsi in Romania, or František Kupka, who had strong correspondence with the Prague artists, and he was also one of the master of the mentioned Czech František Foltin after he left Košice to Paris. Or László Moholy-Nagy, who could be surprising, but for example, who was an actual member of Abstraction Creation group in the 1930s and spent all the summers from Amsterdam and London in Paris. And he was organizing already the Chicago Bauhaus from the 1930s, and his idea was to invite all the Eastern Central European artists who he had a good connection to Chicago, and his idea was to use the concept of abstraction creation to create in Chicago. So for example, that's why he met Brancusi, that's why he had a good connection with some Polish artists like Władysław Strzemiński or Katarzyna Kobro, who is interestingly never been to Paris at that time. They were correspondents with all those artists who were creating that non-figuration. One of the art center that I would like to highlight was connecting with their idea is actually in Poland, Łódź, and the Museum Sztuki that they organized, which was founded in 1931 on 15th of February, exactly the same day when Théophane Duisburg, Piet Mondrian, Robert Delaunay or Jean Arp started to boost the abstraction creation in Paris. This is an interesting example how in Poland a museum, which was the first modern foundation of a collection, could be realized at the same time when non-figurative artists realized to be grouped together in another region. And Katarzyna Kobro and Władysław Strzemiński wanted to actually expand their idea of art to a museum. Their idea was not on just on neoplasticism, which was really parallel to that kind of artistic world that was represented by Piet Mondrian or Theo van Doesburg in the Style movement. But they believed also, as the Style, that they should expand the neoplastical art world to design, to architecture, and the whole everyday life. As Strzemiński said, it is not enough to create a good work of art. It is also necessary to create the appropriate conditions for it to exert influence. And this was this necessary creation how they organized in Łódź the mentioned Museum of Stucki, as for example, he before his stay in Russia, he wrote articles about an idea of a museum of artistic culture, which would be supported by the government. Sometimes Strzemiński is judged to be fascist, sometimes to be communist, sometimes anti-political. In this way, he was really criticized at that time because he was the first artist to receive the possibility that in Poland, in Łódź, the municipal building, the original city hall, was given to be a modern collection and a foundation of a modern museum. And Strzemiński's idea was to create that in Warsaw, but the Warsaw municipality didn't support this this idea, this conception, and because of that he found a good political network in Przeclaw Smolik, who helped him as the head of the Department of Culture and Education in Poland to realize this concept. Kobro and Strzemiński had a help in Henryk Starzewski, who was staying in Paris at that time, and he connected them with Vasily Kandinsky, László Moholy-Nagy, Piet Mondrian. I will not say all the artists who were at that time in Paris, and they actually sent 76 artworks to this museum, but the Museum Stucki was just a beginning of, as I mentioned, to create the appropriate conditions for the art what he imagined, because he imagined that the neoplastical work could be realized not only in the whole interior design of the collection, but as a network in whole Eastern and Central Europe. So he actually wrote letters to the Manes group in Prague and asked them if they would like to also open a museum in the Czech Republic, and they could have a whole collection of modern museums there. And unfortunately, it didn't happen, but by the 1930s, he invited like Kupka or Fortin and other non-figurative artists to also give donations to this collection, because the whole collections was a donation from the Paris-based, and I wouldn't say French art, but the Paris-based non-figuration from that time. And it was also important that the whole idea was to use the neoplasticism to create an educational activity for people to understand Polish modernism, international modernism, and also non-figuration from this period. It was a successful story which could happen, I think, because of the lack, it was mentioned by Katarzyna Kobro, that the lack of the openness of the municipality to give this space for the museum, and also because of the network which was already existing between Paris and the Central European artists. Another example in my presentation is based on also an artist, a non-figurative artist who was representatives of this dialogue, František Foltin, who spent so much time also in Košice, also in Brno, and as we heard of, he came back from Paris in 1934 to a modernist city, which was modernism, as Matthew Rampling mentioned, in architecture, especially the representation of Bauhaus artists, but it was not modernist on a way that the non-figurative artwork was not really welcomed at that time. So that's what I mentioned in the title, what is why we can talk about just a bit of peripheries. In Košice, for example, József Polák, who was an organizer there and who is painted by the Hungarian Sándor Bortnyk on the right corner. So Polák started to organize exhibitions in the 1920s, and it was based on urbanism, mechanism, and showing the technological and urbanistic ideas of this period. And I didn't want to mention any ism, because also, like we were talking about in the first panel of that, neither the Czech artists used Czech cubism as a word. So mainly the topics, the subjects which were somehow circulating between those artists, like the students and fellows of Lajos Kassák, who were also in this era and who were also connected with other artists from the Austro-Hungarian monarchical states. Foltin, who actually settled down for 10 years in 1924 in Paris and became a student of Kupka, but also connected with other tendencies. Usually art history mentions him as a biomorphic abstract artist, which I think it's a total misunderstanding of his artwork, because he didn't even have that kind of organic abstraction which comes from the surrealistic idea. Just the use of floating in his paintings creates the concept of the surrealist treatment of space. And in this case, we can see, and his chair letters also mentioned, that he wanted to create landscapes like in his Košice period, but it's kind of landscape without any connection to the figurative world. It's the same kind of idea in a way, like parallelly we see in Paul Klee's art in Bauhaus, who geometricized the landscape what he have seen. And Paul Klee is also an important as a factor, like in Košice in 1920s, the mentioned organizer Polák invited him and other international artists to show what is modernism, but the whole audience there rejected that kind of non-figuration. In 1937, when Foltin came back to Czech Republic and actually settled down in Brno, he also wanted to organize 2 years earlier an abstract show there from those artists who were not living in Czech Republic but living in France and in other countries. But this exhibition was also mentioned in a negative way. Actually, they used as an artistic idiotism what abstract artists are connected in Paris. This was so similar with what happened in the Hungarian scene. And as Miroslav asked me to talk more about the Hungarian art scene, so parallelly to the Brno scene, in 1938, this was the same idea in Hungary when Etienne Bőti and Ferenc Martin, who both of them were actually students in the same kind of fine arts academy of Budapest, and such as Anna Prinner. They left Budapest in 1926, and first Martin, then Bőti started to organize a show 12 years later in Hungary, which was a strange effect in a way that there were no actual abstract exhibitions before that ever in the Hungarian artistic scene. So we see, like in the Kunsthalle of Budapest in 1929, they had a show of Paul Gauguin, next year of Van Gogh, and Ferenc Martin, all those artists who had a strong correspondence with the Hungarian scene from Paris, they didn't send back for selling any non-figurative art, because they felt, and they mentioned it in their correspondence, in their letters, that the Hungarians are not prepared for that. In 1938, the most progressive gallery of the time, the Tamás Gallery, opened the show. Like we see some works of Anna Prinner, or Alfred Reith, Etienne Bőti, Ferenc Martin. So all those artists who actually lived in Paris at that time, and they invited other artists from Berlin and from Hungary who were non-figurative or who started some kind of non-figuration, but they rejected the participation. So there was a show titled Hungarian Abstraction, with all those Hungarian artists who didn't live in Hungary at that time. And it had to be closed in 8 days, because the audience was shocked of what they have seen. But Martin, who came from the south of Hungary, of Pécs, he used this opportunity after the end of the Abstraction Creation and the beginning of the Second World War to came back for his not hometown, but his place where he started his career, to Pécs. He started his career in Pécs in 1920s, which was a city at the time that actually was economical city which was famous of mining. And in 1923, the Elizabeth University from Bratislava moved to Pécs, which increased the number of university students there. But it was also a cultural city at that time, famous of the Turkish monuments, and famous of jazz music, and all those modernisms, especially in literature in the 1920s. It was in that era when in 1925 a lot of students from the same high school actually Alfred Forbath, Farkas Molnár, and Andor Weininger, who became architects of Bauhaus and who were friends and classmates of Ferenc Martin, that decided to move to Dessau and join the Bauhaus. Meanwhile, Ferenc Martin, because of his stepfather and master Joseph Ripuronai, he chose to settle down in Paris. He was also in correspondence with the Bauhaus students, and later, he was the one who invited these artists to participate in some projects. For example, a Bauhaus church in the Palasok building, a Bauhaus-affected church in Palasok building in Pécs, or in the 1930s, 40s, in the Kikelet hotel, and some villas that we find on the hills of Pécs. Meanwhile, this was the period of the Horthy system, which was represented by nationalism, and it was rejected, for example, to participate in a lot of modern movements, such as when the Bauhaus artists came back to Pécs, they didn't I would say that they were not welcomed as an architect, such as it happened with František Foltin in the Czech Republic, that the syndicate of painters rejected him as an official painter in 1937. It happened with the Bauhaus architects. The Hungarian government rejected their degree from the Bauhaus as an architect. So they have to, for example, some of them study in Budapest again, because the Bauhaus degree was not enough for the Hungarian system. This was, meanwhile, also that place which was left by Martin, and he came back, as I mentioned, in 1939. And what is important that that area of Pécs, which was a cultural area of the 1920s and the 1930s, so it started to help to boost so many artists, not only Martin, not only the Bauhaus artists, but like the most famous one, Victor Vasarely, who was also living in Pécs, left Pécs in 1930. And what is interesting that Martin, who became a non-figurative artist and was seen as an abstract artist by the Hungarian art historians, as he was really influenced by the mentioned Abstraction Christian group, actually his use of the composition, to use the whole image field, was coming from Joseph Riperonai, who said that we should call that painting at the same moment. All the elements of the construction of the painting should be highlighted. So when he came back, in my idea, he actually bring back a Central European tradition to Central Europe again, but he also represented the new, fresh, modernism in the way of not fixing any elements on the horizon, which is a typical way of how the Surrealist group works, and abstracting the nature that he had seen. By the 1950s, he created an art capital, I would say, in Hungary, in a hidden abstract world. It was communism at that time and in Hungary, and Ferenc Martin could actually help so many Hungarian artists like Ilona Keserű, who nowadays had a huge textile collection in New York Museum of Modern Art, or Ferenc Lantos, who is one of the most acknowledged geometric abstract artists of the 1960s and 70s of Hungary. And actually, the Pécs studio, and I wouldn't say, but almost 20 students, and even it was him who wrote a letter to the Pécs-born Victor Vasarely in 1969, and they founded the Victor Vasarely Museum in Pécs as well. And he could do it in the 1960s because he was the good friend of George Atzel, who was the cultural politician of the Kádár system, of the socialist system, and Atzel gave him much more freedom than in other countries, and because of that, in 1960s, it was not so in the view, not so in the aspect or perspective of the actually forbidden abstraction, what was normal in Hungary. So because of the farness, the distance from Budapest, and also because of his representation representation of modernism early in the 1940s and 50s, he could spread his views among his students and among these artists, such as in Lantos' work, who created land art or geometric abstraction in 1950s without any heard or any knowledge of what's happening in the American hard edge or in the French ideas of the 1950s. So as a comparison, we see that between the Paris and the Eastern Central European dialogues, the Central European tradition remained especially in a way of an abstract phenomenon, and there were several examples of artists who became organizers or followers of non-figuration in their own country. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Flora. Any questions? Yep.
It's rather, Flora, it's rather a comment or even correction. You said no community in Paris except Polish, but there were a huge Ukrainian community, which started quite early with Mikhailo Boychuk and Alexander Archipenko before 1910, and then in 20s it was quite a huge community. And there's a very good study about this by Vita Susak, actually published in Ukrainian, French, and English. It's a huge book. So?
I would react for that. So I meant on non-figuration, and I didn't put, but I didn't want to spend so much time on that, so I didn't put those artists who came from Cubism and Modernism to that kind of category who I meant on organic or geometric abstraction. So in the beginning, I mentioned that I am focusing on those artists from the 1920s and 30s who were total non-figurative artists and on their community. Of course, there were community like, we could say, these artists were communities with Archipenko, with Brancusi, with Miklós Gusztáv, with Joseph Csáky, with Hungarians. So I was mentioning that on the 1920s and 30s total non-figuration.
Thank you. Any questions? Yeah, if not, so okay. Thank you very much. Next is Professor Maria Rakušanová, teaches at the Department of Art History of Charles University in Prague. She received a PhD in art history even from Charles University in Prague. She pursued postdoctoral research at the University of Dresden. She was curator of modern art in the gallery of the capital city, Prague, from 2001 to 2002. He studied at the University of Dartmouth. Her books include Degrees of Separation, Bohumil Kubišta, and the European Avant-Garde, Prague 2021. Her lectures about Czech modernism as pioneers and not epigones, networks between Prague, Paris, Berlin, Vienna, Budapest, and Lviv. Thank you very much, Maria.
Thank you, Miro, for the kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. And let's start. Thank you very much. Art historian Douglas Cooper published his book, The Cubist Epoch, in 1970 on the occasion of the exhibition of the same name. In the book, he provided a space for art outside the traditional geographical framework, focusing, among other things, on so-called Cubism from Czechoslovakia. Of course, the provenance designation was a mistake in his book. Douglas Cooper cited most of the examples of Cubist works from before 1918, when Czechoslovakia did not exist. He used the indication of the country of origin inspired by the title of the exhibition Cubist Art from Czechoslovakia, which Czech art historian Jaromír Zemina prepared for the Tate Gallery in London in 1967. It was to the credit of Czech art historians such as Zemina that from the second half of the 1960s onwards, Czech modern art, and especially Cubism, was made visible in Western European and American museums. However, the reactions of the foreign public to the phenomenon of Czech Cubism did not correspond to the expectations of its Czech promoters. The work of the Czech Cubists included in Douglas Cooper's aforementioned exhibition were described by the American art historian Rosalind Krauss as, I quote, the result of the orgy of academicism that the new style unleashed across Europe, end of quote. It is very tempting to deal with her assessment with a simple condemnation. This is an arrogant speech by a representative of cultural hegemony who, with typical ignorance, does not bother to familiarize herself with the criticized phenomenon. The reason for Krauss's criticism, however, was not her lack of knowledge of Czech and Central European modern art, although this, of course, also played a role. The cause was obviously in the formulations of the claims of influential semiotically oriented art historians, including Rosalind Krauss, who highly appreciated Picasso's Cubism and, on the contrary, condemned other artistic expressions called by the same name. Krauss's analysis of the revolutionary aspects of Picasso's transformation in pictorial representation are some of the best art historical texts of the entire 20th century. In relation to artistic expressions outside the very narrowly defined canon of modernism and the avant-garde, however, Krauss's comments find themselves in the vicinity of texts that were, and still are, written by their authors within familiar, implicitly racialized narratives of modern versus backward. In my paper, I will focus on some of the artists to whom Krauss's condemnation was addressed. These artists from Bohemia, active in the years before the First World War in the Osma Group, the Group of Fine Artists, and the Manes Association of Fine Artists. Czech art history usually associates Cubism, but also Expressionism, with their works, terms that I will avoid in this paper or use in the context of critical reflection. I will attempt to show the originality and specificity of the work of Czech artists through several case studies, situating it in a complex web of relationships across Europe. This relationality and interdependence is, in my opinion, very well captured by the concept of inter-imperiality, which I will use throughout the paper in a similar sense to that used by Laura Doyle in her book Inter-Imperiality, Holding Empires, Gendered Labor, and the Literary Arts of Alliance. Laura Doyle's book deals with inter-imperiality in a long historical and, above all, global context. However, she identifies precisely East Central Europe as the space whose position is the best captured by the notion of inter-imperiality. Doyle's inter-imperiality emphasizes, in connection with this region, and now I quote Doyle, multifaceted struggle of communities that, for centuries, have lived in the shatter zones of successive and converging colonizations. Such regions need to be understood and honored not as peripheral territories, but as strategic inter-imperial zones, again and again vied over for their resources, and their geopolitical location before, during, and since the height of European hegemony, end of quote. Laura Doyle's inter-imperiality is not an interesting concept, however, just because it captures well the positionality of the smaller states of East Central Europe between vying empires. According to Doyle, and again I quote, inter-imperiality refers to multiply vectored relations among empires and among those who endure and maneuver among empires. End of quote. Using the tools of the inter-imperial theory, Doyle explores, again quote, how communities who labor to resist within the inter-imperial field of relations have likewise shaped history at many levels. That was the end of quote. Analyzing the strategies, attitudes, and approaches of artists from East Central Europe who lived and worked in the space between the rival empires through the tools of inter-imperiality may allow us to make visible their specific contribution to European modernism. Doyle defines an empire as, again quote, an expansionist state that achieves sustained control over the labor, finances, administration, and material resources of a foreign territory through political, financial, and violent coercion. Each empire's power of control arise and develop in relation to other empires, end of quote. Controlling relations and connections is therefore important for any empire, and regulating infrastructure is a powerful tool in this regard. Empires compete with each other for infrastructure, but at the same time, they control how it is used in the territories they conquer. The Austro-Hungarian monarchy placed great emphasis on the control of cultural infrastructure, and I will try to use the following example to show what this meant for the art in imperial centers and inter-imperial territories. The latter clearly attempted to subversively exploit the set system to their own advantages. The Austrian cultural bureaucracy fostered an art infrastructure that supported the multinational character of the monarchy. The Viennese associations quickly understood that if they promoted multicultural inclusivity in their exhibitions, they would receive support from the political representation in the form of funding and other benefits. The Vienna Hagenbund, at a time when it was struggling to obtain its own exhibition space, invited the Prague-based Manes Association to exhibit in Vienna. The Manes exhibition took place in 1902 in the premises in the Zedlitzhalle, newly allocated to the Hagenbund for exhibition purposes. The second Manes exhibition was hosted by the Hagenbund in Vienna in 1911. However, there was no mutual exhibition exchange between Hagenbund and Manes. Manes did not invite his Viennese colleagues to exhibit in Prague, and when Hagenbund finally presented his works to the Prague public in 1911, it was in the Kunstverein für Böhmen in the Rudolfinum. Volné směry, the journal of the Manes Society, did not mention the exhibition at all, and Umělecký měsíčník, the journal of the group of fine artists, published a negative review in which they condemned the entire Viennese modern art scene. In 1914, the Association of Moravian Artists in Hodonín was the Czech-speaking association that provided Hagenbund with its premises for the exhibition. Even before Hagenbund, the Vienna secession understood the benefits of a positive approach to cooperation with Slavic art associations. The secession had invited the Stuka Association from Krakow to exhibit in Vienna as early as 1898, although Polish artists did not take advantage of this opportunity until 1902. During its own presentation in Vienna in 1902, Stuka noticed a positive response to the Manes Association exhibition in the Hagenbund. By the end of 1902, the Manes Association was already exhibiting in Krakow at the invitation of Stuka. The Austrian cultural bureaucracy appreciated this type of inclusive cooperation between artistic associations representing different imperial subjects. After 1902, whenever the Austrian government wanted to organize a show of Austrian art abroad, it called on Stuka to represent Polish artists. Incidentally, it also called on Manes to do the same for Czech art. For example, in the 1904 Louisiana Purchase exposition held in St. Louis, the Austrian Art Palace contained separate exhibitions by Stuka, Manes, the Hagenbund, and the Viennese Künstlerhaus. What was missing was the Vienna Secession, which submitted a proposal for the arrangement of the entire building, embracing the notion of the exhibition as an aesthetic installation and including only 5 artists, all of German and Viennese background. It was considered to be insufficiently inclusive from empire's perspective. The Hagenbund, Stuka, and the Manes Association also took part in the Kaiserhuldigungsausstellung in 1908. The Manes Association was, however, a bit of a stowaway in these activities because while the Hagenbund and Stuka did indeed show a considerable degree of reciprocal inclusiveness, Manes never organized a Hagenbund exhibition in Prague and only invited Stuka in 1927. The fact that the Manes Society got away with it suggests that the imperial cultural bureaucracy of the Austro-Hungarian Empire was so convinced of the benefits of its inclusive system that it could not imagine that any of the inter-imperial actors would want to subvert it. At a time when Manes Association took advantage of the hospitality of the Hagenbund in Vienna, dictated by the multicultural inclusiveness of official state cultural policy, it invited to its Prague exhibitions artists from France, an empire openly hostile to the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. Manes held exhibitions of French art in 1902, 1907, 1909, 1910, and 1914, before World War I. However, the interest of the French partners of the Manes Association in cooperation was completely one-sided. Since 1908, the Manes Association had tried in vain to organize its own exhibition in Paris, specifically as a part of the Autumn Salon. The French side, represented at the time by the sculptor Émile-Antoine Bourdelle, advocated that folk art, embroidery, ceramics, and costumes be exhibited as much as possible in the exhibition. However, especially for the young generation of Czechs, represented, for example, by Bourdelle's pupil at the time, Otto Gutfreund, this demand sounded absurd. For them, it was also disappointing, because it signaled that nobody in Paris was interested in modern works of Czech provenance. In the end, the Manes exhibition in Paris did not happen. The actors of the modernist and avant-garde movements in Paris before the First World War pursued their own imperial interests, aimed at spreading their own power and influence. Piotr Piotrowski has already spoken of imperialism in relation to the expansionism of the avant-garde. I will, however, focus on very specific examples of the avant-garde's implementation of an inter-imperial strategy involving art trade, art criticism, and traveling exhibition projects. For Daniel Hanner Kahnweiler in particular, the space of East Central Europe became a crucial experimental laboratory, testing the power of Picasso's Cubist influence and also presenting potential new outlets for the modern art market. In 1932, Émile Fila, recalling the preparation of the exhibition Les Indépendants at the Manes, which included French Fauvists and proto-cubists, said that Kahnweiler refused to send Picasso's work to the exhibition, claiming that, in 1910, Prague was not ripe for them. It should be said, however, that Kahnweiler also considered Paris itself to be unprepared, as he organized the first ever comprehensive monographic exhibition of Pablo Picasso in 1913 at the Gallery Tannhauser in Munich. In the following years, Kahnweiler considered East Central Europe to be Picasso-friendly and lent Picasso's work, for example, repeatedly to exhibitions of the group of fine artists in Prague. Collectors of Cubism from the region, such as Vincent Kramář, undoubtedly played a large part in gaining Kahnweiler's trust. Kramář understood Kahnweiler's mission well, and because he also believed in the historical significance of Picasso's revolution in pictorial representation, he soon advocated for his appreciation as an art critic as well. In 1913, he wrote an article for the magazine Umělecký měsíčník called Chapter on Isms, in which he ridiculed the shopping spree that was supposedly sparked by a traveling exhibition of the Parisian cubist Henri Le Fauconnier or the Italian futurists. He went on to argue that the only contemporary art that is developmentally relevant to the future and therefore worth buying is the work of Picasso. Vincent Kramář had excellent contacts not only with Kahnweiler but also with other art dealers in Paris. Even Kramář, however, was unable to get the Prague group to exhibit in Paris. Foreign exhibitions of Czech artists before the First World War were held mainly in Berlin at Herwartswalden's Der Sturmgalerie and in Munich at Hans Goltz's Neue Kunstgalerie. Two of Émile Fila's work were also included in the exhibition Die Neue Kunst, which took place at the beginning of the 1913 at the Mietke Gallery in Vienna. In this case, however, it was probably an exhibition prepared by the Parisian critic and picture dealer Adolphe Basler. It included several Parisian artists from Basler's circle and then several Slavic artists, which Basler, who came from Poland, had acquired through his Central European contacts. The Vienna exhibition also included several paintings by the Berlin group Jugendfreie Kunstschau and Neue Sezession, of which the Czech Bohumil Kubišta was also a member. In 1913, Basler negotiated with Georg Tappert, the chairman of this association, for a possible future exhibition in Lviv, Galicia. He wrote of Lviv as a, and I quote, rich, young and still unspoiled city in which there was great interest in expressionist art, especially among architects, end of quote. The exhibition planned by Basler did not take place. In 1913, however, the Lviv Society of Friends of Fine Arts, an association of exclusively Polish-speaking artists and art lovers, held an exhibition of futurists, cubists, and expressionists, which was a fragment of an exhibition held earlier in Budapest. The Budapest exhibition included two collections that were presented in 1912 at the Berlin Gallery of Herwart Walden as an exhibition of Italian futurists and an exhibition of the aforementioned Neue Sezession. From Basler's words about Lviv, it is clear that gallerists and art dealers from the Western centers perceived Lviv as a yet untapped market in which demand for new art could be found. These imperial plans of modern art for expansion are clear, but it is not clear what the Lviv Society of Friends of Fine Arts hoped for from the exhibition. It was certainly not motivated by an apostolic desire to spread modern art, as the poster for the exhibition, in which Józef Wodinski parodied one of Bohumil Kubišta's works on display, already reveals that the association wanted to distance itself from or even mock the modern focus of the exhibition. It is possible that the Lviv Society decided to take over the exhibition prepared by Walden from Budapest because it was trying to match the internationally active, also Galician society, Sztuka Krakow. Thus, the motivations of the Lviv Polish artists to join new artistic networks may have been underpinned by the aforementioned cosmopolitan and inclusive cultural policy of the multinational monarchy. And I conclude. The Lviv Society of Friends of Fine Arts distanced itself from the exhibition by, among other things, caricaturing Kubišta's painting on the poster. Lviv citizens encountered the motive of the murder, treated in parodically exaggerated colors and dynamic forms, in the city in 1913, a year before the outbreak of the war, in the midst of growing tensions. The legibility and general clarity of Kubišta's original painting remained despite the parody. The modern representation proved resistant to the mockery of caricature. The power of the impact, not only of Kubišta's murder, but also of his other paintings exhibited in Lviv, was reflected in Galician art in the following years. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Maria. And we have here the first question.
Maria, thank you very much. Fascinating speech. It's not a question, it's a comment. Because it's extremely interesting topic. It's topic of cultural Austrian policy. I'm talking about Austro-Hungarian policy. And I just want to make a short remark about the last Austro-Hungarian exhibition, which fortunately or not fortunately did not take place. In 1917, with the administration of Karl, which was like young bureaucrats who wanted to change the equation, Austrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs decided to send Austrian exhibition to occupied Odessa, of all places. It was fully developed. The commissar of exhibition was Otto Prutscher, and it was necessary to show to occupied Ukrainians the highest standard of Austrian art. So exhibition had three sections: painting, design, and even fashion design. Everything was decided. It had to be in Rusov House in Odessa. It was with Austrian calculation. Quantity of banners for trams in German and Ukrainian. It was only one problem. It was planned for the 18th of November, 1918. And by miracle, it was not sent, because if it could be, maybe the Kiss by Klimt now could be not in Belvedere, but in the Odessa Museum of Fine Arts.
It's fascinating. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I didn't know about it, and it's really very fascinating.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Of course, I will, in a moment, I will talk about the same exhibition in Lviv by Sturm, but and actually it was criticized
It
very
was
much.
very,
but I can't agree that the poster was a caricature. It was just a copy, exact copy of Kubišta painting. And to add, because I didn't have it in presentation, actually Basler, he resigned from the exhibition of French sculpture after that. It's exact copy. Actually, I've been to Zlin just to check the painting. Yes. 9 years ago, I came to Zlin.
It's not...
It's exact copy.
Sorry? It was, this one. It was, to be frank, I didn't see the poster. I didn't get the chance.
We have original in Lviv.
Yeah, I know about
Actually,
it, and I visited Lviv and tried in an ethnographic museum to get to it.
Exactly.
Can I ask you, have you seen
Sure,
it?
I will send you a great copy. I have a poster, I have a copy at my place as a very important artifact.
I think it's slightly changed in the color, isn't it?
No, it's quite a bit green. That's all. It's gray-green, that's all. But that's exact copy by lithography made.
Yeah,
About the critics, it's absolutely right, because Basler, after he resigned to make exhibition of French sculpture, he was afraid, because it was just mockery for this exhibition. But about poster, I don't think it's right.
I'm not the only one who suggests this theory that it was a mockery. There is this wonderful article by our British colleague Elizabeth Clegg. No, British. Elizabeth Clegg is British. Yeah.
She was in US, maybe
Oh, she's British. Yeah, and she wrote the article in 1991. And I would say I agree with her, because she brings some compelling arguments. For example, the framing with the letters, you know, that these letters are, and not only letters, but futurist, cubist, i tím podobně. And, you know, everything is very similar. You don't have to, yeah. No. Yeah, definitely. The painting, as you've seen in Zlín, is monochromatic, and it's rather like it's difficult to name the color in case of Kubišta's paintings, but it's more like gray, brown, yeah. And the poster used green color. It was a lithographic poster using green color and reddish colors. You know, I didn't see it, but yet, I base this I base this knowledge on the article by Clegg. Yeah. So.
Can I? Yeah, that's. Are there another question? No. Thank you very much, Maria. You see, that's why we love the symposiums and these discussions, because we can discuss even very long about the color of posters. And that's why we organize such symposiums. That's nice. Yeah, and we ended this lecture with Lviv, and we start the next and the last lecture of this panel with Andrei Boyarov, lecture about Lemberg, Lviv on the map of European modernism. Andrei Boyarov is an independent curator and researcher, trainer as an architect. He has been active as an artist since the late 1980s, early 1990s, initially working with large-scale painting. At the time, he became a pioneer of Ukrainian video art and turned to conceptual photography. He participated in group and solo exhibitions in Tallinn, Lviv, Warsaw, Lodz, Poznan, Kyiv, Berlin, Amsterdam, and others. The artist uses the strategy of appropriation and tries to open new areas of interpretation and perception for the viewer, and not as just only as an artist, but even also as a creator and researcher. And now we will see some even research points about his city, Lviv. Andrei, please. This one is a PDF.
PDF. I can do it here. Here? It works. It works here. So here. Here I should. Yeah, it works. So I'm Andrei Boyarov. Actually, I'm not an art historian. I've realized the only one here. I'm a visual artist, trained as architect that I was presented, but as an artist I was raised up on classical avant-garde and then on neo-avant-garde mostly. So in somehow my research is a part of my artistic practice as well. So in my presentation, and actually the topic, I'm grateful for invitation because the topic in the context of this symposium is very important for me. When I fully get into research and curatorial work, I insist and I believe that the place of Lviv is Central Europe. It's no doubt for me. It's first time we have such a kind of gathering talking about Ukraine and Lviv in this context. So the aim of my presentation will be just put Lviv as artistic center on the map of European and particularly Central European modernism. So I will just present some facts, events and artifacts and chronology of modernist developments, but just in glimpse because the interwar history of art in Lviv is very, very rich. But I will not evaluate or build any hierarchies of the perspectives of center peripheries, optics, or discussion, but to show some different ties, connections, interconnections, and intersections with its city itself, region, and main European capitals, and by natural way with Vienna, especially since we are here. Yeah, and I have to apologize in advance. After triple COVID, sometimes I have a kind of dyslexia. It comes to me later. Some names or titles, probably, maybe, but I hope I'll manage. So let me first put the Lviv on geographical and political map, how it looks for today. Lviv is very western part of Ukraine. It's just 80 kilometers from Polish border, 250 kilometers to Slovakia, Hungary and Romanian border. The closest big cities are Krakow and Warsaw. The distance to Budapest is the same as to Kiev, and Vienna and Berlin still closer than Kharkiv or Donetsk in the east of the country. And there is some names I took from Wikipedia of the city. So back in 1913, Lviv, with the name Lemberg, it was capital of Galicia, a province of Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was actually second big city was Krakow at the time. It was a Polish autonomy, and among population has three main ethnic groups of Poles, Jews, and Ukrainians, with some Armenian, Czech, Austrian, and German minorities, to name just a few. So at that time, right before the First World War, just three events or developments happened which clearly marked a breakthrough of modernist ideas and visuality in the city. After several years of construction, this building, the Magnus department store, was opened. It was designed by 27 years old Roman Filinski. It was totally modern building with reinforced concrete structure, with an impressive glass facade and free open plan of the floors. It was completed almost simultaneously with similar commercial buildings in other Central European cities as Vienna, Prague, and Breslau or Wrocław. So it was de facto built in the international style. But looks like architect himself, he was not aware of it. His views was still closer to national romanticism, and he believed that he is creating a new national style, despite the fact he was a student of a German school in Stuttgart. And when I show you this building, here we have Opera House, and on the right, this is the Industrial Museum, which Professor Rakoushkova mentioned it. Just few meters on the right, the few hundred meters on the right is this department store, so very close. And that's how we come to the right of the of the Opera House. That's exactly the Industrial Museum, and the same poster, colors almost original here, how they have it in Ethnographical Museum. I think the only copy they have. So just few weeks after opening of the department store, this exhibition opened in Industrial Museum, in the halls of Society of Friends of Fine Arts, Towarzystwo Przyjaciół Sztuk Pięknych. Actually, this show came from Budapest, as you mentioned already, after shows in major European capitals and cities started from London and Amsterdam. Its title, The Exhibition of Futurists, Cubists, and Expressionists, did not entirely correspond to its contents because it came from Budapest without the work of futurists. And actually, this exhibition is not listed on the exhibitions of Der Sturm as well. It's not on official list of the exhibition. Actually, I have a copy of catalog as well of this exhibition. Catalog mentioned one work of Oskar Kokoschka, his self-portrait. Quite possibly is the one on the right. He made this, actually, it's oil painting made for a cover of Der Sturm in 1910. Because now it's in a collection of in Hungarian National Museum, because exhibition came back there. So it was in a private collection, gets then to state collection, or it was a portrait made the same year. So the exhibition happened before the first Herbstsalon in Berlin, organized by Der Sturm. So mostly works shown on exhibition was works of German expressionists. Most of the works was by Alexei von Yavlensky. It was about 60 works of them, and he was right, it was works of Bohumil Kubista, the only cubist on the whole exhibition. For sure, this work was on the exhibition, which now, Kiss of a Death, Polibek Smrti, it's now in Liberec National Gallery. And the Vrazda, the murder, which was prototype for this lithograph, for the poster. Here I made a fragment from text of Elizabeth Kleck, because she studied all this story more carefully and put all the details around the exhibition. So in my interpretation, there's quite a symbolic picture they choose for the poster, because depicting it's depicting killing of a good taste and a good painting, how it was perceived at that time, what is good painting. And that's true. Reviews in the press bordered on mockery. And actually this one called Mayaki, which means delusions and hallucinations. Anyway, there is opinion that the exhibition had some influence on Polish expressionists as well, some of them came even from Krakow to see this exhibition. But from all the other sides, it was totally criticized from any perspective. But some things happened earlier as well in the same building, and before in Palace Sztuki, but still in the same Society of Friends of the Fine Arts. This building was opened in 1904, as you mentioned it already. Now it's a main building on National Museum in Lviv. Some exhibitions of pre-modernists, we can say, happened before in the Palace Sztuki. You can read all these names up on the slides. And one of the important figures for Lviv art scene was an actress, playwright, early feminist and collector Gabriela Zapolska, living in Paris in the last decade of 19th century, exactly it was 1805. She began her collection of contemporary painters not known to the public at the time and even to the dealers. In addition, she was acquainted with some of those artists, and Paul Seruzier was her lover. In 1904, she moved to Lviv, married Polish painter, and her collection was available for friends and for other artists in her villa. In 1906, it was presented in the same halls as the Sturm exhibition. There was already lack of works of Paul Gauguin and and some other top French names. She sold it back to the Paris. The price was very high, and she was providing theater in Lviv. She needs money, and that's why she sold it. But still, this collection for a few years was in her house. This work of Paul Seruzier is now in the National Museum in Warsaw. There is evidence that privately works of Seruzier was seen by Jan Hrenkowski. It's in his memoirs. He was a Polish expressionist from Lviv, later formist. We know it for sure, but looks like it's first time when Mikhailo Boychuk, Ukrainian painter, saw it in her private salon, not in the on exhibition, but in her villa, where she kept all this collection, which is quite possible. I think from that time he was stick for this idea of neo-Giotto painting. So about Mikhailo Boychuk and his school. Later, in 1904, Boychuk was living for 1 year in Zakopane, High Tatras resort in Zakopane, with Polish writer Stefan Żeromski, who actually was a translator into Polish of the first futurist manifestos. And the creator of so-called Zakopane style, Stanisław Witkiewicz, he wrote recommendation for Archbishop Andrzej Szeptycki of Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church about him. And it was a start for Mikhailo Boychuk education, first in Krakow, then Munich, and then he settled in Paris and already had exhibition with all of his group. I think Professor Mudrak will mention about Boychukism for sure. So that's interconnection I have to present. He finished in Académie Ranson, and he was influenced by whole Nabi and Neo-Giotto movement. Above mentioned Jan Hrenkowski, one of the Polish expressionists. So there were a few in Lviv. As I said, they probably were influenced by Sturm exhibition. Later on, their first exhibition happened in Lviv right 1 month after they showed in Krakow, all together with Krakow artists, a small group of Lvivians. You can read their names here. Ludwig Lille joined it as well, this monument, and Leon Chwistek on the second exhibition of expressionists, sorry, he changed the name for formist, just to differ from German expressionism. They called themselves formist. Actually, Chwistek moved to Lviv in 1930. I will talk about him a few words later as well, and was very important figure for Lviv art scene as well. He was philosopher, mathematician, and as well, we can see not so bad artist as well. So Chwistek and formism. But let me be back to 1914, because there was some break in exhibitions because of First World War and then Ukrainian-Polish War. Let's call it war, because it was the war for the city, who will reign in the city after the Austrian Empire. So 1914. This iconic work was made in Lviv as well. It was created in the studio of Henryk Mikolas. It's called Niebieska Flasha, Blue Flash. It was produced in technique known as Arabic gum, which was regarded as a manifestation of pictorial aesthetics. A few layers of pigments enables to achieve multicolored image. Moreover, Mikolas achieved here almost Cézanne's fresh coloristic approach in this new medium of visual arts. First lesson in painting he took from Julius Kosak. Then Mikolas was studied in Krakow Academy of Fine Arts, tutored by Jan Stanislavski and Julian Falat. We have to say that Lviv had no own Academy of Arts, so mostly artists moved to Krakow Academy. One of them was Henryk Mikolas. It's an exceptional artist, which really abandoned it in Lviv. He was strongly influenced by Vienna Camera Club, and he started actually to be photographer and painter as well after their first exhibition in 1900 in Lviv. I called him sometimes, I will explain it why, Alfred Stieglitz of Lviv. And he was a great deductor as well. Already in 1906, he was called one of the best photographs of Germany and Austria. As I mentioned, he was influenced by Camera Club and Fotografische Blätter. Here from his early work and one of his pastel from the time he studied painting. As well, of course, he knew very good the Versacrum magazine. And here is his still lifes. You can compare it for Robert von Stockert work about the same time, 1910, 1913. And of course, Trifolium group, I mean the Kleeblatt. So just in 1910, this work of Mikolas was published in Fotografische Blätter as well. We can compare these motifs, the same motifs he using as those guys. Here I have to mention another artist involved with both in painting and photography, and actually his work is presented in Belvedere on exhibition. It's Ivan Trush. In Ukraine, in Lviv, he mostly known as a painter, but not as a great photographer. And he used photography in opposite way. Mikolas actually realized his painterly idea in photography. With Trush, the story is opposite. He using photography to create paintings. I came as early as 1905. He wrote article, the photography and the art of painting. This caption I took from catalog Fascination Photography. This exhibition I came here to Belvedere in 1916 just to see some authors I really wish to see in reality. And actually I believe that Ivan Trush belongs to this cohort of artists and bohemians who was travel, for example, to Egypt with their cameras and with first compact cameras and then using it in a painting. So no doubt Ivan Trush one of them, and we have in National Museum about 400 negatives of him, very good artistic quality. It should be made separate exhibition for him. But back to Henryk Mikolas. In 1921, he founded School of Photography, Institute of Photography at the Polytechnic. He called it senior lectureship or a workshop of photography. Almost simultaneously, similar workshop was organized at the university by Józef Świdkowski. We have to skip Świdkowski as a good artist, but we simply have no time. In any way, Świdkowski was a great artist, but very conservative. He was really stick to pictorialism, and he criticized any distortion of photography, pictorial photography, and he was actually involved in occult practices and even wrote a book about this matter. So Svitkowski, we left him for the next time. And coming back to Mikolas, that's why I'm calling him Stiglitz of Lviv, because he was very open for all the new trends. And in fact, I have to mention at least 30, 40 names of really good artists and photographers who was raised in his atelier. Not only students, because the aim of this Institute of Photography was for students of architecture mostly, but he had students aside as well. So instead of 40, I will mention at least 4, which you can see. One of them is one of the main I can call is Alexander Kshivoblodsky, who was a student of architecture. I put only one of his architectural project, and he was really early start to experiment with collage and montage. And I think very original works, this photo collage, just classical photo, I mean in technique photo collage, but some works he was calling montages from nature. And it's a huge series of these photographs. He started to experiment in the late 20s with them. And I must add that I'm very happy that the son of Alexander Kshivoblodsky is today with us here. He was born in Lviv, in Lvov, in Lemberg, in 38, but he is living in Vienna and he joined us today. I'm really happy. And actually, we've met before. Actually, I must say, great artist himself, and he taught in Austria in 3 schools already. So, good photographer, great photographer, and graphic artist. So, let's go further. And some of the pupils of Mikolas has a huge influence on the Polish neo-avant-garde after the war. Tadeusz Maciejko, he moved to Gliwice, former Gliwice, and there he really pushed a few Polish authors as Jerzy Lewczyński. For the first neo-avant-garde exhibition happened already in year 59. Next, after the death of Henryk Mikolas, Witold Tromer was a head of this school. His photograph, maybe the best known of his works, called Start, made in Lviv in 36. And first he used this technique of isohelia. It was in every photographic European journal about this invention. At this moment, I wish to show us with film, very short film of Witold Tromer.